With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
From wherever you're watching, anywhere in the world and across our different platforms, very warm welcome. I will introduce my guest very soon, but I would like to give my own introduction to her before I put her on the screen. And today we are joined by Shahien Taj. Now, Shahien Taj is the founder and executive director of Henna Foundation. And for almost 3 decades, Shahien has played a significant role in the community as well as across the UK in raising awareness of the social, cultural pressures and conflicts faced by victims of domestic violence, forced marriage and so-called honour-related abuse and violence. In today's episode, we will be discussing forced marriages and intersecting some discussions and debates around honour and the honour code that does connect to the topic of forced marriage. And the campaigns that Shahien has actually worked within over the years have been very powerful and pioneering nationally. All the campaigning she has done over the years has actually culminated in legal measures of protection, such as the Forced Marriage Civil Protection Act of 2007. So we are joined by someone very special and very valuable and honourable in our community. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Shahien Taj. Hello, Shahien. How are you today?
Assalamu alaikum, Maedeh. Good evening.
Salaam alaikum. So today, as Shahien, we've discussed of it, we are going to be discussing forced marriages. Now, just to, before we go into it, if you could just break down what you would describe and define as forced marriages, because there can be sometimes grey areas, I feel like. So for the audience and with the work you do with women and girls, how would you define forced marriage?
So forced marriage is really, in simple language, it's simple to understand it when one or both individuals have found themselves in a position where they are told or it's been arranged for them to be married, but one or both are actually not happy about it. They have no choice but to proceed with the marriage. And any marriage that where the individual doesn't have a choice and they're being coerced into that marriage, for me, that is a forced marriage. The government have a definition of forced marriage, and I didn't think to actually have that ready to read out for you, because for some reason, maybe I never thought you were going to ask me that question. But if anybody's interested in knowing what the the government definition is, I can probably read it back to you shortly. But in simple language, it's when one or both simply, for me, any doubt in terms of is this marriage right? My advice is always step back, don't do it, and consider. Are you doing this because someone has coerced you into doing it, or you're being forced into this? Because you're right, there is a grey area, and it's that grey area that often people find themselves stuck in because they don't feel they're being forced, but there's so much emotional attachment and different relationships involved. They don't really want to call it a forced marriage because they feel like it's not like someone's got them at gunpoint. So that's where the grey area is. I always say, go and find somebody to talk to, and hopefully these days, Google is your friend. There are so many organizations that could potentially help people. So, yeah. Anything that is going to begin on foundations that are shaky, particularly in marriage, you've really got to ask yourself, is this the right thing?
Thank you for your answer. So we are heading for a good start here. So we've got the definition, and across today's conversation, we'll also be talking about statistics. We'll be talking about who are these victims, how we can move forward as a community, as this is prevalent in our communities. Now, to our audience, you can also, I know it is an area of expertise, but you are also more than welcome to get involved in tonight's discussion on our social media platforms. And we are available across Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and even Instagram. You can give us a follow on our handles. It's British Muslim TV and also SingleMuslim.com. You can feel free to send in your questions, queries, or perhaps no question is ever too silly to send forward to Shahien tonight, and you can do so on WhatsApp on 079 507970 and you can also give us a call. We'd always love to hear your voice and get you live into the studio, and the number is on the screen. Now, just a warning, today we will be talking about sensitive topics, and just a trigger warning, there may be mentions of domestic violence, and as on behalf of British Muslim TV, we strive to serve the community and do our utmost to support where possible. So it is important for me, before we do go ahead and further the discussion, to mention that if you are suffering any emotional distress or have been affected by today's programme, you can reach out to relevant organisations for confidential advice. Full details can be found on our website, britishmuslim.tv/support. If you are in immediate danger, please always dial the emergency services. And as always in the UK, that is 999. Now, as well as your questions, do remember that they can be anonymous, and you can just request them to be when you do send in your questions tonight. And I know the focus is forced marriage, but we will be talking a lot about honour and honour-based violence, as well as the honour code, and a very heavy discussion as well on culture, because this does have a strong connection to the concept of honour, which in turn links to forced marriage, and Shahien Taj will discuss that during the show. So if you do also, maybe not questions specifically for forced marriage, but honour, shame complex, etc., you can feel free to also send those on our WhatsApp or also on our social media, and I'm happy to put those forward to Shahien. And you can also as well send your questions by calling in. Now remember, throughout the show, it's not just about asking questions. You can also leave a comment, what you think about what we are discussing tonight, agree, disagree, any point of debate. You're more than welcome to share your thoughts. It's only through discussion we can move forward and progress as a community to also combat these issues and cultural related problems and predicaments that we do find in our communities. And now there are a mass number of taboo subjects and underrepresented topics that I do look forward to discussing on the show. If you do have any particular, you can also put forward any suggestions to me and the team. And now we're going to dive back into the topic, and I want to speak more about statistics, Shahien. And there was a report, so for this year, I'm assuming maybe the government is still collecting the numbers, but last year, they noticed the referrals fell by 10%. But of course, when you look in the government website, it's not a specific community they look at. They look at different communities as well outside of the Muslim community. For you and your organisation, in terms of not last year, but this year, have you felt like the referrals have fallen to you or risen?
Look, with we've said this for years. While what the forced marriage unit offer us and share with everybody, and everything is published on their websites. Just because this year it appears that the numbers have dropped, doesn't necessarily mean that is the case. A lot of the cases that go to the forced marriage unit relate to cases where somebody has found themselves abroad, or somebody's called on their behalf and they're seeking help. But remember, there's a lot of people who end up in marriages that are, potentially going to be forced marriages, who aren't going to be going abroad. They're going to be happening here. So capturing that data in terms of how bad the problem really is, I still have always said from the beginning that it's a good guide for where we're at, but it's not the be all and end all, because lots of organizations get referrals up and down the country, and there's no sort of central way of gathering all that information. But in terms of the drop, it could be any number of reasons, though. It could be that remember, the last couple of years we've had a pretty hostile environment where a lot of our communities, people of color, are a bit anxious about going to authorities and stuff, because they just feel that sense of belonging. And that applies to young people as well. This isn't just adults, as in mature adults, feeling that way. So it's a good guide, but if you look at the statistics over the years ago, we've had very few, for example, coming from the African Somali community, for example. And what we're seeing is that the numbers of calls coming from that community has certainly not last year, the year before, I think it had gone up, and people were saying, well, that's never happened before. Why?
Yeah.
And the Somali community that I speak to, they say, well, we don't have forced marriages. However, people have talked about how, because some parents find it difficult to sort of get their kids to balance their sort of east-west dynamics, they think sending them back home and getting them educated overseas, that will put them on
the solution.
Yeah, that's a solution.
Yeah.
And in some cases, some do end up being married as well. So I think the way society in the world is moving at the moment, it is a bit of a crazy world we live in, and I think the statistics are kind of going that way too. So yeah.
Of course, and of course, there are cases that they go abroad, and when the media does speak on forced marriages, that is the cases we hear of, those that are abroad. And could we get those women back? Is it easy? How does the process work? And are there perpetrators that get prosecuted?
Right. So in terms of getting somebody repatriated, as long as somebody knows how the system works, and you're confident you have the right links, it can be a relatively easy process to follow, but you really do need to know what you're doing and how you're doing. So the typical way would be, it could be that, I don't know, social services have picked up a case because a young person, maybe a sixth former, hasn't turned up in school, and some of the kids might have said, oh, well, she was talking about that there was a threat that she was going to be taken abroad, and there's it could be just lots of words, and because there's a concern, social services have had a referral from the school, and after they've spoken to a couple of people, it turns out that yes, that is the case, that this a young person is in abroad. It could be any country, for example, and they've managed to make contact with somebody who knows what's happening. Then what would happen is, if social services have contact with organisations like ours, that's one route of contacting the forced marriage unit, or they can directly contact the forced marriage unit. The forced marriage unit will take their details. They will arrange for a welfare check. Obviously, they would need to have details like the address where the young person is staying at. Once the welfare check is done, and depending on how the welfare check has been executed as well, they are able to safely take that young person back to a safe place because a lot of the time what we find is the young people are found in small towns and villages rather than cities. And then arrangements are made for them to be returned to the UK. I know that sounds kind of like very simplified. It isn't that simple, because you have to have the right partners in place to make that sure that repatriation is safe. There was a time when the young person was expected to sign a document to agree that they would pay the debt of the flight. Those of us who knew about this did try and campaign against that, because we felt that how can you expect an 18-year-old who's never really earned any money, not been in a job, they're in a desperate situation, and they need to be returned to the UK, and here you are, you're saying to them, yes, we can take you back, but the flight price, by the way, it's a debt that you owe, and we'd expect you to sign this and pay it back. Well, they did sign, and most of them did eventually have to pay back. The initial campaign process that went ahead and asked the government, this isn't right, didn't really work. It fell on deaf ears. And then Shasta Gohir from the Muslims Network and others, got together, and they pushed and they pushed and they pushed. And the last time I heard, that is now not the case. So they don't have to worry about signing this document and having to pay for their flight back. So the whole focus is more about the safety of that young person, the young person being repatriated. Once they're brought back to the UK, they are supported by a third sector organisation. If they are underage, social care will be involved as well. And then the process is to find them a safe place to live. There's been some great success stories, and there has been some blips as well where things haven't gone as planned. So I want to be realistic. I don't want to pretend that there's a magic wand and it's always a perfect return. Sometimes things, there can be glitches, but in I would say 99.9 cases, that there is a safe return. Certain countries, in terms of repatriation, are almost near impossible. So, for example, certain Arab countries, because of the laws there, it's very hard to get a repatriation. Places like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, that's a pretty straightforward way of doing it. Yeah. So these are things that sometimes people don't understand. So when somebody says to me, I've got a real difficulty at home at the moment, and the argument is, I want to marry one person, my family wants me to marry somebody else, and I've agreed to go to Umrah, and when I come back from Umrah, I will then rethink what to do. And because we've had situations where relatives have tricked the young person, so they've gone to Umrah, and from Umrah, instead of returning to the UK, what they've done is they've been taken to Bangladesh or they've been taken to Pakistan. So we have to alert the young person to say, look, we don't know what your family situation is. They may decide to stay, I don't know, somewhere in like Dubai or anywhere else, rather than go to Pakistan.
Right.
There might be some difficulty. So it's about planning forward and looking at potential difficulties that might arise. But it is important to, if you are in contact with somebody who is thinking of going abroad, and there is this potential, forced marriage that may be ahead, is making sure that you take the details of where they're possibly going in the village, in terms of the potential destination, whether it's Pakistan, Bangladesh, the name of the male, if you like, in that family as well. So it's easier to so it's important that you have that sort of information. You have like sort of keywords like I don't know, like a secret word to make sure that it is the person that you are speaking to, like a code word.
Code name. Okay.
Yeah. So there's everything has to be thought through when you're doing something like this. But also in terms of protecting somebody, there are also ways of applying for a protective order that uh, like a
Could you elaborate on that, please? What is a protected order?
So like forced marriage protection order is something that can be applied for to ensure that the forced marriage doesn't happen. So we've been for many years have been working with lawyers called Dawson Cornwell solicitors and the late Anne Marie Hutchinson. I did probably about 20 years worth of work with her. And rather than the standard process of the forced marriage protection order, which is a process where you apply to ensure that the young person or young adult, whoever it is, doesn't enter a forced marriage. It's a legal document that basically says that if there is a marriage, it's an arrestable offence, etc., etc. And what we would do when we're working with the client is to say, well, the client is saying that they want to be protected, they want an order in place, but they want to be able to travel conditionally and on the basis and an agreement that the person comes back.
Right.
So it all depends on how good your solicitors are, because some legal practitioners will kind of say, well, here's we'll get your protection order, and you can't go anywhere, and you can't do anything, and you can't travel, and you can't do this. Well, as long as you have a court order that sets out the conditions, there are things that you can do. So I don't want people to think that once you have a forced marriage protection order in place that that you have your liberties taken away. That isn't the case. I think law in itself is as good as the lawyer that is working for you, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you raise really good points, Shahien. I'm going to come back to them very soon. As for the audience, so Shahien is talking extensively and discussing the process, judicial on a legal level. If you do have any questions related to that, I think right now is the moment to throw them to us, and you can do so. And also, have you experienced this issue? Please do share. Remember, we will keep it confidential and anonymous. And it's important for us to have access to case studies because sometimes with these issues, people and the community can often either overlook it or be in denial over it. In the UK, we have had some high-profile cases. There actually has been a true life drama that's been released in September, and this covers Banaz Mahmood's case, which was an honor-based violence case, and it did involve forced marriage and amongst other elements. So you can watch that on ITV Hub, I believe. And as well as Banaz Mahmood, there are many high-profile cases, but also those that we may not know about. So this is why Shahien is with us today. We will discuss the cases, and like I said, if you would like to share your experience, if you feel like it will benefit our viewers and the audience, you can feel free to do so, and we can assure you it will be put forward in full confidentiality, and it will also be anonymous. Any questions you may also have, or comments for Shahien tonight, feel free to send those. It doesn't always have to be through WhatsApp, but you can. So you can also send it via social media, and that's on our Facebook Live. We're also live on Twitter, and we're also live on YouTube. We'd also like to hear your opinion, your comments, and you can do so by calling in live to the studio. It's always a pleasure to hear your voice and your opinions. This is what makes the show very special. It's the viewers. You can call us on 0192 423 1083. But I must warn, standard rates will apply, so please make sure you have your bill payer's permission. And as well as delving into the Henna organisation, and as well as the other networks across the UK that do work a lot within the sector of forced marriage and honour-based violence. We're also going to be discussing with Shahien on how we as a community can also put in the work to either raise awareness or through other avenues. We'll also be, of course, noticing the elephant in the room, which is COVID-19, and there has been reports that honour-based violence and a fear that forced marriages will spike as lockdown eases. But it's not only lockdown, it's the travel restrictions easing as well, because like Shahien mentioned in the show, some of these forced marriages do take place abroad. And soon we'll also be discussing those that do take place in the UK, as this is something we cannot be oblivious with. And even though there are legal measures, like every other law, it does sometimes and often gets broken. So we will dive into discussion over that. And it is important for us to be having this discussion today, because when the drama actually came out in September, honours-based violence and forced marriage campaigner Jasmine Sangera actually warns that the case of Banaz Mahmood, which happened years ago, could and will happen again. So this is an ongoing problem, and we do need to work together as a community, whether it's from home, within our workplace, etc., to attend to and address and confront these issues. And that is why we're having this conversation today. And this show is, of course, about love, marriage and relationships. But when we talk about marriage is multifaceted, and it's not always a happy ending. There are some tragic consequences when this marriage can be, for example, forced, or other aspects which we will also discuss in upcoming episodes. But of course, tonight's focus is forced marriage, and as we mentioned earlier, there can be some grey areas in forced marriage, maybe particularly when we're speaking about the pressures. At what point do you say this is forced marriage, or can the woman and the girl should go seek help? So these are questions that we will put forward to Shahien later in the show. But I don't want to just be the only one putting in questions, so please do also send your questions on WhatsApp or social media. And just a warning, I did say this at the beginning, but a trigger warning, there will be mentions of domestic violence and honour-based violence. But as I said, they are uncomfortable conversations for the community, but they must take place, and that is where change will begin. We are in a world of social media as well, so we can all use our voices to raise awareness on the issue and reach out anyone and everyone from all over the UK as well as abroad. And you know what, we will be also speaking about honour, because I feel like the concept of honour is very prevalent in communities, and it can have a detrimental effect on women and girls. And these happen in different avenues. They can be psychological, or as we've seen, and the media does cover, like the physical aspect. But there's also, when you do look at research, there's also financial consequences. And we'll be talking about how parents can say their honour is on the line if they don't get married. This is something that's very common, and it is shared a lot. There is always this concern and this dilemma that people are in a predicament where their parents are saying, their honour is on the line if they're not getting married, or if they marry someone their parents not approve with, again, their honour is on the line. Honour, it does play a huge it has a huge place and deeply engraved in our communities. So we will speak about that in more detail as well. But of course, we are starting with forced marriage, and then we will explore the link between forced marriage and honor, and then swiftly go into the concept of honor. And especially because, you know, our religion does teach us to obey and respect our parents, especially mothers. For example, paradise lies beneath your mother's feet. Therefore, you have to agree. This is something, that a line that is used against some women and girls. So this is an example of how forced marriage can be used against you. And like I said, to raise awareness and expand our knowledge, we will find out more on who these victims are and potentially look at different case studies. I can see all of you guys are watching on social media. Remember to leave a now. And that's enough talking from me. We'll get back to Shahien. So Shahien, we were speaking about the process, and you raised some interesting points and some progression that has taken place. But of course, we do have a long way to go. Now, what I was discussing with the viewers is, so we do have the legal measures, but as a community, as individuals, what can we do? Because authorities have previously said, for example, that raising awareness helps, like through the media, and now we're in a world of social media. So how can we as individuals move forward and help these women and girls? Are there any avenues or processes that we can do at home?
You know, the discussion around forced marriage nationally here in the UK has been going on for about 20 years. And initially it was, government and a local government and all this guidance, campaigns for law change, etc., was happening. But alongside that, including, the forced marriage unit, were very keen to do community engagement work. So my recollection is, I think it was about 2000 and maybe around 2005 to 2007, there was a lot of activity in the context of Muslim communities, where there was a realization that we do have a problem and we have to do something about it. So there was a lot of work that was done looking at, from the position of Islam, what does Islam say about forced marriages? There was various campaigns. We were involved in one particular campaign that was a European-wide campaign. At the time, Professor Tariq Ramadan was kind of like leading on that campaign. So the work in terms of what Islam says and all of that has been done, has continued to be done. I think most of us who come from Muslim backgrounds, practicing Muslims or, not so practicing Muslims, we all know that there is no space in Islam that allows for forced marriages. However, for me, I think we can talk about this until the cows come home. Quite
we
literally.
Actually, Shahien, sorry to cut you off. We actually have a question that's been sent in for you, and this is asking, is sent in as anonymous. How do you find love after forced marriage? What would be your advice or take on that? I'm assuming maybe, I don't know, would these, like someone who's experienced forced marriage, how can they find love after that, or perhaps gain their self-confidence, etc.?
Okay, well, actually, I was leading on to that. So
brilliant.
The question. So for me, over the last couple of years, it's been about how much harm does a forced marriage do? How does that impact on the individual, and including men as well? Let's be honest, we're all made of, blood and guts and all the rest of it. We will have a heart and a soul. Yes, women, their feelings may develop differently, and men slightly differently. But either way, the trauma that comes with pain, because a forced marriage is essentially pain, the simplest way, and it's harmful pain. And that takes a lot of time to recover. I think there's a lot of benefit in talking therapy, having somebody who could be your peer mentor. Counselling therapy is really good, but it's really important to make sure that you are able to move on from what's happened. We have worked with clients who sadly endured the most horrific marital rape because the husband believes that he, as a Muslim, has the right to her, and she must submit on to literally his command. We've heard things like, time and time again, the angels will curse you if you don't submit. All sorts of things being said, often, misinterpretations of religious hadith, etc. So I for me, it's like, okay, let's have a look at some case examples of the trauma that it impacted, and in some cases, these marriages have resulted in children, and how this has impacted on the children too. For me, it's a bit like, you can give the example as well. Okay, if you have chicken pox, what does that do for you for 2 weeks? Makes you feel dreadful. It takes, and the older you are, the harder it is. Yeah. And I know it's a weird analogy to give, but because anyone can have chicken pox, yeah, and you can have really temperature and be quite, poorly with it. So, like some people say, oh, well, it was a marriage, how bad could it have been? So for me, it's really important that there's a recognition and an acceptance that the damage you do to a person's heart and soul, I call it really evil. Anybody who's been encouraging, a marriage that really shouldn't be happening, I think it's very, I just call it plain evil.
Plain evil. Now, Shahien, we'll come back to that because you did mention men, which is interesting because to add that gender dimension, because it doesn't happen that often. And we actually had a question sent in while you were speaking on that for you, and that was, how do you overcome forced marriage, and what are the practical tips? How do men deal with it, because they don't usually express themselves as much as women, or not as confident? What would your advice or answer be to that question?
I honestly, like the previous question, can you find love? Yes, you can, is the answer to the previous question. But I would, go back to that point about the importance of being able to heal from the past. And in terms of men, yes, you're absolutely right. For men, it is harder to accept to themselves that this marriage wasn't something that they had had a lead role in, that it was something that this is what they really wanted. But there are now you have sort of counselling therapy that if you literally go to Google and tap in Muslims counselling service, thankfully in England, where I'm based in Wales, it's pretty dire. But in England, there's some really good work and some support mechanisms and counselling available. I highly recommend that they consider doing that. If they feel that counselling is it's one step too far, then there are lots of organisations up and down the country. If you want, I can send you the links and you can share it on your social media platform.
You can share it on our platform, of course.
Yeah. It's about contacting an organisation, and you will come across somebody who you feel that you have a click and a fit to be able to talk to them and feel not be worried about, am I being judged here? I think in terms of the female clients that we worked with, we found them to be easier.
What do you mean when you say easier?
Easier in terms of being able to connect with a service provider,
Okay.
more open to dropping their load, if you like, with somebody who understands where they're coming from. I found over the years that often the young men that we've come across, when we talk to them, we ask, well, have you never spoken to somebody about it? And, they might have told a friend if they're lucky enough, and, it's not been that easy for them. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done around the whole masculinity thing in our community. Yeah.
A lot of work, and masculinity, this is a topic we will be discussing upcoming weeks. Thank you so much, Shahien, for sharing resources and your advice. It's highly appreciated, and thank you to our viewers that are sending in their questions and comments. We actually have a comment from Ali, and he's saying, my parents promised me to my cousin when we was born. I'm feeling pressured into getting married to her. It's hard for me to find someone else right now. I don't have any other options. What do I do? What would be your advice for Ali?
Yeah, my advice to Ali is please reach out to one of the many organizations. They will more than happy to speak with you, hear you, your concerns, and put you in touch with, if you need it, a lawyer. In terms of being betrothed from a young age, this is something that was very common, 30, 20 years ago. We're seeing less of it, but it's not something that's gone away. And depending on the family and the parents, how much of their conviction is tied to this, and what are their real reasons? Is it for bloodline reasons? Is it about keeping the family together? Is there some sort of financial gain, like land inheritance? What is their motivation for all of this? And it's really important to talk that through. But there are things that can be done to get the help that he needs. My contact details are on our Facebook page. You can contact me directly via Facebook as well, or there are many organizations from the Muslim Women's Network to Hayat, to Halo Project, to Imkan, Southall Black Sisters. There's various organizations that he could contact.
Lovely, help. Thank you. That is refreshing to hear that there are a few organisations. Thank you to Ali for sending in that question. Now, Shahien Taj, of course, your organisation has been pioneering in combating forced marriage and raising awareness. I wanted to ask you how you personally support victims of forced marriage, and what is the process that you take? I know we already spoke about the institutional processes, but for example, when a victim comes to you, how does the process work?
Okay, so when somebody contacts us, what we always do is give the person the space, the opportunity to feel that they can openly speak about what's happened to them, and reassure them that there is help. Then we will explain what the options are in their particular circumstances. A lot depends on, things like age. So if you're 18 and under, we'd follow one process. If you're 18 plus, then there's another process. For example, when I earlier mentioned, and remember, I'm not a lawyer, I'm speaking from experience of how we've done things. So I advocate a civil protection order, because what that does, it allows you to be protected without losing your family. And just want to explain how Henna in particular has done this. So when the Forced Marriage Protection Orders first came in to place, I think it was 2010, if I'm right. I'd have to check, but either way, when it first came into place, it was a very clinical process, just as a protective order. But when we started using them, and one of the first drawbacks was that the young person at risk would say, yes, I don't want this marriage. However, I don't want my parents getting arrested. I don't want to take them to court and that sort of thing. So my response was, well, we need to give you some sort of protection, and I can't walk into your family house and say to your mum and dad, this is wrong. So we do need a protective order. And the way in terms of...
So, sorry to cut you off, we'll get back to that, but you say that, for example, they do make those demands or requirements, I don't want my parents arrested or them to go to court. Is that actually feasible? Like, is that possible?
Yeah.
To fulfill that?
Yeah, so depending on, has there been, what level of harm has happened, has a criminal offence, for example, being happened. And remember, a lot of the time there isn't a criminal offence as such. No one's parent has beaten the hell out of them or at this stage. Remember, yeah. But if there isn't obviously a criminal offence, obviously you have to involve the police. You have no choice because it's a safeguarding issue, yeah.
Okay.
But there are lots of situations where it's simply an argument within the family and a disagreement, and there's tension between the parent and the young person, yeah? And the young person has come to a point where they would, so often we hear about self-harm, yeah? And even attempted suicide because they don't want to run away because they don't know where they're going to run away to. They don't want to lose their family, but they don't want to be in this situation. So I'll give you an example of a couple of years ago. We had a young woman who had already found herself in a marriage, and it was her first. She was very young. She was taken out of school, and as soon as she was 16 and able to be married, even in court, because as long as you have your parents' consent, you can get a civil marriage too. So it was a very quick process. They had the nikah done and a civil marriage as well. And she quite literally moved in next door. So it was her dad and her dad's brother, two brothers living next door to each other, had their wives, had their children, and these kids grew up together as well. So this poor girl, because she was betrothed from a younger age, this is what happened to her. She was actually seeing somebody else. I don't think at that age she was particularly, it's got to be him and he's my life partner. A lot of young people do have relationships. I'm not necessarily saying that they are, like a full-on relationship, but a relationship nevertheless, a commitment to each other, if you like.
Yeah.
So she found herself in this marriage and initially thought, I'm just going to have to make the most of the situation I'm in. Considering she was so young and the kind of pressures that were being put on her, I think he suspected anyway that she had been seeing somebody. And so jealousy came in. There was a lot of power and control. He wouldn't allow her to go out. She wasn't allowed to have any money. There was no trust. And one day she was in her room after a massive argument. It was dark. She was sat in front of her dressing table, and all of a sudden she could see a red light literally going across the room. And what it was, there was a secret camera that was put in the left side of her, and she wouldn't have noticed if it hadn't been for the lights out, and she could see that there was, where's this red light coming from? So she went to the cupboard, and that's what she found. And I think it was that was when it was a breaking point for her. She contacted me and said, I can't do this anymore. I need to get away. And I'm in this marriage. I want this marriage to be ended. So she came from a very traditional British Pakistani background, very kind of conservative. And we put everything in place. We managed to get a secure accommodation. We had a police escort to bring her out. And we also
had... Oh, that's amazing.
We also arranged for an order to go in as well. So we had the solicitors ready to go as well. So we arranged this, and the police were literally waiting at the end of the road for her, lastminute.com. Because her sister wouldn't leave with her, she decided she wasn't going to go. So the whole thing kind of went to pot. I had to apologize to the service providers, but that's okay. And a couple of days later, we're back in that same situation. And it was in the middle of the night, I got a call and said, I have to get out. And we made provision for her. And it was literally a couple of days before Eid. So you can imagine it's Ramadan. She's now gone missing. She is in a refuge provision. She's gone into a space that is...
You've made some... Sorry to cut you off, Shahien. You made some really good points, but I'm afraid, unfortunately, we are reaching towards the end of the show. I would love to hear more of the story, and I think our viewers should. So if you could send that over, and guys, we will share it with you. Now, we are wrapping up, and it is such a shame that we are so short of time. We've only got 60 seconds, but before we do wrap up, of course, it is a multi-dimensional topic. And Shahien, I'm going to thank you, and we're so grateful to have you tonight for touching on so many aspects and areas of that. So thank you so much. I'm definitely sure that our viewers did benefit from this discussion.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And we will be touching on it because, as I said, it is multidimensional, and there are so many areas that we didn't get to either finish or dive into further. Remember, you can always be part of our conversation next week and coming weeks. Before I do wrap it up, so today there were mentions of domestic violence, honor-based violence, forced marriages, and we are honoured to have Shahien working in our community and being on the show tonight. So this is a subject we will revisit for sure. At British Muslim TV, we strive to serve the community, and we'll do our utmost best to support you where possible. It's important for me to mention that if you are suffering any emotional distress or have been affected or triggered by today's program, you can reach out to the relevant organizations for confidential advice, and details can be found on britishmuslim.tv/support. And if you are in immediate danger, please always dial national emergency in the UK.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.